Okay, well, good morning, everybody. You're very welcome, and we're delighted to have you at the meeting. We've just concluded a session with your colleagues in the health portfolio, and we'd had an engagement with those people in January. So this will be a little bit newer to you than it was to them, so we'll bear that in mind. And just for ease of reference, I'm going to refer to your department as the Department of Children rather than use the full title because I know I'll trip myself up and all of that. But we are aware of the full title, but we'll just for ease of reference, we'll do that for this morning. So Kevin is going to put up a graphic that you received. And we just basically what we'll do is we'll just very briefly walk you through that. We'll talk to you about some of the things that have happened in the sector in recent times, but really as well, it's as much about breaking down barriers between what we do and what you do, and have an informal discourse outside of the Oireachtas, that we can share views and learn from each other. And we're certainly open to learning from you. So that you would have an opportunity then when we're finished walking you through what we do to ask any questions or have any comments, and we can take it from there. Okay. So Kevin, if you want to pop up the graphic.
Should be up there now.
There she is. So basically, we did this infographic for one reason and one reason alone, and that is to demonstrate to the people who have a vested interest in the health and welfare sector, including the children's sector, as to the breadth and depth of the workforce represented by Forsa. So what we did was we developed a kind of a heart system there that you can see, and we broke it down into hospital, community health, residential and social, and corporate. So if you just want to flick on to the second part, which is available on a brochure, so you can see there in hospital the breadth and depth of the grades that we represent. Scientists, biochemists, catering people, clerical, dietitians, physios, occupational therapists, pharmacists, and all of that type of thing. You move into community health, and community health is going to be the biggest growth area in the health and welfare sector in the next couple of years. And you can see how well populated we are there in terms of ambulance management, children's disability. Again, with some grades that work both hospital and community, vaccination support, family support, and all of that thing. And then we've got our corporate sector, who are the people that are sometimes invisible, or at least considered to be, and they're our ICT staff, our finance people, and all of that, civil registrants, and then residential and social, which gets into the heart of where your own portfolio is: social workers, social care workers, family support practitioners, counsellor therapists, and all of that type of stuff. So I think what we wanted to do was, for ease of reference for yourselves, is that you would have a tool where you could say, well, okay, Forsa, who do they represent? And you can see at a glance exactly where we're populated across the sector, and it gives you an idea of the expanse of the people we represent. Okay, so Kevin, if you want to just take that down. So yeah, that's there for you, and hopefully it will be a useful tool for you. And again, I just wanted to impress upon you the vast array of grades and professions that we where we have representation. So I'm going to just kind of just mention a few things that have happened in recent months in the kind of the health sector area. Maybe I'll ask Chris just to come in and maybe talk about what we do in Tusla. We also want to talk to you, and I'll ask Catherine to talk to you about our Section 39 and Section 56 voluntary agencies and where all of that is. Okay, so just in terms of health and children, which actually used to be one department at one stage, a number of things that we'd like you as politicians to think about, and that is the efforts that have been made by the workforce in delivering outcomes for the good of the Irish citizen. And let's just talk about COVID for a second. So when COVID visited us last March in 2020, remember, we had no contact tracing, we had no swabbing and testing, vaccination was a million miles away and all of that type of thing. And pretty much what we had to do is we had to set aside our normal trade union positions on how we protect workers and pretty much allow 100% flexibility in how the workforce were deployed. So we had people that went into contact tracing before there was a contact tracing function. We had people who went swabbing and testing before we had swabbers and testers. And now in recent months, I think anybody who's seen the vaccination rollout at first glance, anybody who's been vaccinated couldn't be but struck by how efficient the vaccination rollout is. I myself was vaccinated on Tuesday down in the Helix in DCU, and I was particularly struck by the fact that there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who were being moved in and out, receiving a vaccine in under a half an hour. It was incredible, but it takes a workforce to do that. And we have a number of people who, without negotiation or without question, relocated themselves away from their workplace into vaccination centres to do what's best for all of us. And I think that should be commended. We've also had a cyber attack on the HSE, as we know. And as I speak to you, only last night I gave the green light, for example, for our civil registrants to be able to use the offices of the Department of Social Protection and their IT systems to make sure that we can issue birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates. I mean, you take somebody who's unfortunate enough to have lost a loved one, they're not hampered by the fact that they now can't get a death certificate because our people are in away from their own workplace doing what has to be done and around the clock. Equally, the people who are in the sector, all of the doctors and nurses and all of the staff have to be paid. There's no payroll system because it's under cyber attack. Everybody got paid. And what that took was our people in our administrative ranks working around the clock all weekend to replicate a pay cycle, literally from a memory bank, to make sure that people were paid. We also now have, in recent times, we have a winter plan issued by the HSE. We have a sectoral action plan issued by the HSE and TUSLA, where we will be continuing the rollout of various childcare initiatives, the Sláinte Care programme. And what we're saying is that in those childcare initiatives and Sláinte Care, our health and social care professionals will be at the very core of delivering those objectives. The health sector and the children's sector, it's not just about doctors and nurses. It's very much about our health and social care professionals, and they will be key cornerstones of making sure that we have the type of services that people really as a basic right should have and should be entitled to, and that will be better for us all. So that's just a kind of a brief whistle stop. I'll come back to this when I sum up, but I want to maybe ask Chris to just tell you about our involvement in TUSLA and the whole childcare portfolio.
Yeah, thanks, Eamon. And what I might cover as well is the children's disability piece as well, for everyone, just to give you a flavour of what happens there. And there's a reorganisation of the children's disability services going on within the HSE, and creating children's disability networks and coordinating the support to children with disability and assessment of need and all of that. And our members are the ones who are delivering that service: our physiotherapists, our psychologists, social workers, OTs, assessment officers. They're all members of Forsa, and they all deliver those services in the networks. And it's gone through a great deal of change lately, and they are there responding to it. In regards to TUSLA, as you know, TUSLA is it has a number of roles and functions, largely to do with child protection. I'll go through maybe some of the professions. So we've social workers who are at the coal face with child protection, emergency child services, fostering, adoption, access work, dealing with unaccompanied minors, and the list could go on and on that. We have social care workers in the residential setting for children in care, very important role for them. They're also in the community. They also look after children who have been in care in an aftercare setting to make sure that they can get back out and function as in a normal part of society by, you know, getting further education, getting a job, organising, you know, accommodation, and making sure that they can function, and that support is there for them up to their early 20s. And we have family support practitioners who go in there to homes and support families before they get into the system in a prevention mode, and to assist families in not becoming another statistic as part of the system. And they are very important workers there for families as well. And particularly during COVID, these were still going into people's homes, our family support practitioners, making sure that they had the necessary supports there. We've educational welfare officers who have a role in following up on children and continuing their school, too much school, and that all obviously became a big problem when schools started opening again, and the role that they play there. You know, creches and things, we have early years inspectors who have to go out and inspect those to make sure that they are fit for purpose for us all to put our young children into. So there's a broad range of grades, and that's only some of the grades. We have psychologists who support children who need the appropriate therapies because of you know, any bad experiences that they've had, and they end up in care, etc. We have psychologists there supporting them through that recovery. So it is a wide range. There's almost 4,000 staff there. The vast majority of them are FORSA members, and all of those grades that I mentioned are all FORSA grades who have continued to provide the service even through the COVID piece and everything else. They're in a vital service to the children and the families that need them. But there's also another cohort of workers who are not direct employees of TUSLA, who provide services on behalf of the state. And under the TUSLA, the legislation that established TUSLA, they would be kind of listed as Section 56 agencies. I don't know whether you're familiar with that term or not. And those Section 56 agencies, the vast majority, or a lot of them, would have been maybe called Section 39 agencies under the old HSE system. Again, they are the same professionals that I've identified who are providing services on behalf of the state, but through a private delivery model. And they suffered the same cuts that public servants suffered back in 2010, 2011, in terms of income and so on. And it's been difficult to get a route for them for pay recovery the way we have had for public servants. So that's a big problem for us with those Section 56 agencies. And Catherine is at the forefront of dealing with that issue in Section 39. We'll give you more detail around that. So that's just a whistle stop of the types of people that we represent that are on that listing that our graphic that we gave you. But just to put some real ideas, we have people who are in the coal face, for example, who work in domestic violence centres as well. They all had to keep going during COVID, and probably the demands on their services were probably increased during the COVID and lockdown. So I could go on forever, guys. So maybe I'll finish there. Let other people have their say, and maybe some questions might bring some more out.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that, Chris. Before I call Catherine and possibly to talk about Section 39 and Section 56, just to say to you on TUSLA, like, there's a relatively new CEO in TUSLA who has clear vision on how he wants to reorganize that organization for the better. Because TUSLA, and I remember having an informal meeting with Pat Rabbit in his capacity as chairperson, and we both agreed that the staff within TUSLA, every time there's a childcare crisis, it seems that, you know, the easy thing to do is just to say TUSLA is a basket case and this, that, and the other. And it's very difficult for the workforce to hear that constant messaging. And they say, well, Jesus, like, you know, it's almost as if you have to hide rather than say you work for TUSLA. And we need to get away from that. But like, in fairness to the new CEO, he's been very, very upfront about engaging with us about his plans for restructuring. Some of it we're not going to like, that's okay, you know, some of it. But the one thing we will do, and we can assure you yourselves as politicians, we will work with that organisation to facilitate a restructuring that's a best fit for the services that need to be delivered. And that's where the breadth and depth of the grades, groups and categories that we represent really comes into sharp focus. So I might just ask Catherine maybe first to talk to you about some of the voluntary agencies and how they're constructed within the system, and maybe Adam as well. So Catherine.
Thanks, Eamon, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your time. And I think the reason we decided to go and do the graphic that we started off with is that when we do these briefings for people, and we're always very, very thankful to get the opportunity, because we want to show you how many people Forza represents, what they provide across the whole of the health and public service, that we give you an awful lot of information. We're all dubs, we speak really fast, and then people are going away going, Jesus, what is it? So we're hopeful that even after today, when you have a chance to digest the actual graphic, is a lot easier to understand when you see who we represent. And I suppose we're trying to join up the links between the workers' representative and yourselves as the public representatives, you know, in that I always love Venn diagrams in schools. So that bit in the middle where we've common interest, we're all serving the public, as Eamon said in an earlier briefing, or another, you as public representatives and us as the representatives of the workers in the public sector. So we are very thankful for this, and just bear with us because we're conscious that the group we met before you have met us before. So your questions might be different, and we might need to go back a little bit further, but I'm not going to give you the entire history of the voluntary sector. You're probably as familiar with it as I am, but I do want to bring you kind of up to speed as to where we're at with the Section 39 funding piece, and then what our plan is for Section 56. So, I mean, I think we've always looked at the Section 39s, which from your perspective, the big Section 39s would be the Enable Irelands of the world, who are providing very important services to children and to people with disabilities on behalf of the state, but they're essentially private organisations. As their representatives, we have a very strong interest in making sure their workers are treated fairly, but that goes beyond just workers' terms and conditions. It also links in with the rights of the citizen. As a union, we're very passionate about that, because, you know, the underfunding of Section 39 organisations, and I know we keep going Section 39, Section 56. Section 56 are those that used to be Section 39, and then when they moved to TUSLA, they're now funded through TUSLA rather than the HSE. So I think Bernardo's is an example, cottage homes, some family traveller care, and Adam's going to give you a bit of detail on that when I wrap up. But ultimately, the way I've always seen it is very simple. If you look at children's disability services, there's a child with a disability and a set of parents or foster parents or guardians looking for services from the state, entitled to services from the state. And because of the unequal funding model that has emerged over the years, what you have is a child in one part of the country might be getting their services through the HSE or through, say, St Michael's House, which is a big public sector organisation. Someone else might be getting theirs through Enable Ireland or Child Vision, for example, up in Drumcondra. What happens then, because of the underfunding, and we've just recently commissioned an updated report, which we'll share with you when it's launched, on the funding model for Section 39s and Section 56s. The turnover of staff in those areas, the ability of organisations to retain and key staff is really impacted by the lower wages and the lesser terms and conditions, the lack of stability. The other key thing that's not about this morning, housing is such a big issue in Ireland, but for workers, stable employment is the link to getting housing. So for those delivering services in Section 39s and Section 56, they don't have that stability. They're at the mercy of grants each year that come through either the Department of Health or your own department, through the HSE, through TUSLA, as it cascades down. But as I bring it back to the child at the centre, that they're, the parents and children might get used to, getting their services, if it's assessment, if it's, say, speech and language, if it's physiotherapy, if it's psychology, from certain practitioners, all represented by us. And then naturally, those workers are going to look for permanent employment. They're going to look for more stable setup. So they're going to move on. So in that instance, the worker is looked after, but where's the child at the centre of it all? And I think as a state and as a union, we're very passionate about making sure that there's equal opportunity and equal access for all people who need the services. And it shouldn't be based on what the funding model is. There should be one systematic funding model, and that it would work in a different way to what we have now. A lot of what we have now, if you look at, say St Michael's House came out of, parents getting together, I think in the 50s, if it was. You look at Enable Ireland, how that was set up. It was when, as a country, we outsourced some of our services to the charity sector, to the voluntary sector, to the church, because we were a new country, we were setting up. All of that is very understandable, but we're a modern country now, and I think now is the time where, similar to, if we're looking at schools are coming back under state patronage, then we should be looking at the services to the most vulnerable. And I am very passionate about it, but I don't think you can have a more vulnerable citizen in this country than a child with a disability. And I think that that's part of the, from Force's perspective, we're so passionate about making sure this model is funded properly. It's not just it. Obviously, we're representing the interests of our members and the workers in it, but it's more than that, and it's bigger than that. So that's why we really welcome the opportunity to talk to yourselves about it. We have written to the Health Committee, looking to present the findings of our research on the funding model, and we're happy to talk to yourselves about that when it's launched as well. I mentioned that at the start. So just to tell you where we are with the Section 39 piece, and I will be brief, I promise. We have, since the pay cuts Chris referenced, we have been trying to get those people working in those in Section 39 in the first instance back onto the same rates of pay as their colleagues in the HSE and in the big Section 38s, John of God, St Michael's House, Daughters of Charity, etc. We were successful nearly 3 years ago now, in 2018, in securing new pay rates or pay restoration for 50% of the providers of Section 39 services to the HSE. In December, we reached a deal to get pay restoration for the other 50% of Section 39 providers in the HSE, but without retrospection. We were back in the WRC, in the Workplace Relations Commission, discussing that retrospective element in April, and unfortunately both the HSE and the Department of Health have said that they're not willing to provide funding for retrospection. So now what we have is a 3-tier system for people providing services to the same children, where you have your public servants, your Section 39 who got their pay restoration early, and your Section 39 who didn't, who are only starting to see pay restoration now after 11 years. So Chris referenced the Children's Disability Networks, and we see an emerging problem there again, where you have, depending on who's the bigger agency, will depend on who leads out on it on a geographical basis. So you've some Children's Disability Networks where Enable Ireland are the lead agency. So you have people on the lesser terms and conditions, on the lesser wages, leading out and managing the work of the HSE people, and then the section, say the Michael's House, John of God's people. You'll have somewhere else where the HSE are leading out on it, and then they're trying to direct the work of those in the Section 39 agencies, which are private agencies. And where it causes difficulty, again, will be around recruitment, retention, provision of services. Like as a model, myself and Chris and Eamon and Adam's new to working on this piece, we think it's a really good idea, Children's Disability Networks. We're very much in favour of it. We think that parents of children should have a one-stop shop, should have one person looking at all the needs of the child, should be able to say, well, look, we're not just going to put them on 7 waiting lists and see what happens. We're going to take a holistic approach, and that's our members that are doing that, and they're very passionate about it. But for it to work, it's our view that it has to be funded in a different way. And we're not going to solve that this morning, and I'm not going to delay the whole meeting on it, but it's just part of one of the key issues for us as a union that we wanted to flag with yourselves. The other piece then, and the knock on from that, and Chris has referenced, is the Section 56. So I mean, we all do our work differently. So as a union, we tend to go for the big chunk, get that sorted, and then do the knock-on pieces. So TUSLA would be the next step. So Chris has launched a claim for the same pay restoration that's been agreed for the Section 39s. And that's where we're looking to mirror what we've achieved so far for those Section 39s for those agencies that are funded through TUSLA. I might let Adam just give you a little bit of information just on what a Section 56 organisation looks like, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep this relatively brief as well, but oftentimes I find it's good to kind of have an oversight as to who some of these organisations are and the kind of work that they do for the children of the country. So Smiley Trust, for example, would deal with children that have behaviour difficulties between the ages of 12 and 18 years. It'd be residential care for young boys and girls, and then there'd be an aftercare service once they become adults. So things like CV prep, access to phone and computers, things like that to help them move forward. Cottage Homes is a charity that provides child and family services. So if children are being raised in a difficult environment, whether they have behavioural issues or there's addiction issues at home, this again is a residential care area. Traveller Families Care would deal with separated children seeking asylum. So children arriving into this country with no language, no information on their own, they would go and liaise with our members up in Traveller Families Care, and they liaise with them and the state bodies as well. We'd also have members as well in Women's Aid who are dealing with domestic sexual and obviously under the TUSLA banner of domestic sexual and gender-based violence and all that comes with that. So these are the members that we represent. For every single one of them, it's a vocation. They're not doing the job for anything, any other reason than that they care about the service users that they represent. Throughout this pandemic, they haven't stopped working. They've continued to go into these residential areas. They've continued to work with these young people. Women's Aid obviously set up a 24-hour hotline due to a spike in instances of domestic abuse. So again, all of these people have worked throughout this pandemic and before. And again, the issue that they keep coming back to is we're still providing the same service we were to the people of this country back when we were told to take these cuts. Nothing has changed. So why are we the ones losing out? I'll hand you back to Eamon.
Okay, Adam, thanks for that. So before I open it up to yourselves, because we're as keen to hear some of your thoughts as we hope you're keen to hear ours. But I just want to kind of wrap up by saying, look, there's a few things here. Firstly, we thought that this would be a good idea in that we always assumed, and probably in hindsight it was wrong, that there were barriers between ourselves and the political system in terms of having discourse with each other. Because we were always kind of a little bit corralled, I think, you know. So we respect the fact that we all do different jobs here, okay? And we mightn't always agree, and that's perfectly okay. And we might even have an odd row, and that's okay too. But I think one of the things that's striking me is that those barriers don't actually exist, in that we're all performing a public service of some sort. You're elected public reps, and despite what some people might, naysayers might say, I have a great belief in the fact that public reps put their best foot forward to represent the citizens of this country. And I'll say that here, and I'll say it openly. Equally with trade unions, we've been maligned at times for being obstructionists. I have to say to you, our interest is to have an excellent public and related service that the citizens of Ireland can get the best level of service they can. And we have a big role to play in that. But just to break it down into a couple of cohorts, in health, for example, everybody believes that the health services, doctors and nurses do wonderful things. But what I'm saying here quite clearly is that health and social care professionals will be at a pivotal hub in delivering a revitalised health system envisaged under Sláinte Care. and revitalised childcare model, right? That's number one. Number two, the state is 100 years old next year, right? And you know, isn't it about time? Remember, it's only in recent years that we've had proper childcare legislation. We didn't have it before that. So isn't it about time we looked at the that are provided for either by the state or on behalf of the state, and make sure that they have a sustainable funding model, and that we bed down those services into a secure service that's not going to be butchered when we reach times of economic recession, for example, and that's not founded on a bed of straw. So it's not just about the workers not getting their pay and all this. It's about having a funding model that makes sure that through good times and bad, we can continue to provide the services. And the third thing I want to just finish off on is, it's often been said about the health sector and the public sector that it's bloated with administrators. And I want to disabuse everybody of that notion, because let me tell you, our managerial cohort on the health census is 1.5% of the overall workforce. 1.5% is the managerial cohort. Our admin cohort is 10% of the overall workforce. And that, when we say admin, I mean people like home help coordinators. I mean people like civil registrants. I mean people like people in ICT and so on, people in procurement and all of that type of thing. And very often we hear the narrative, sometimes by politicians, sometimes by people who run organizations, that, you know, really one of the problems with our public sector is we're awash with administrators and we need more practitioners. Well, we simply don't wear that. And I think what COVID has shown us over in the last 15 months is that what people have given in terms of flexibility and their ability to mobilize has been great credit. And it really is disheartening when we hear messaging that we're really, you know, we're awash with administrators. It just doesn't stack up. We have a cohort of managers who, for example, and I'll just go over to the other side of the house in health, when COVID arose in primary care, who worked around the clock Monday to Sunday to make sure that we could put the things in place that we needed to do in relation to contact tracing and that. So I just want to kind of share that with you. So look, at this stage, maybe Kevin, if you could invite people to make comment or share your views or ask any questions, more than happy to accommodate that. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll just go to people as they indicate in turn. So I had Kathleen Kyunchin first, and then Ivana. And if you want to raise a hand, we'll make sure everyone gets an opportunity, but we'll go to people in turn anyway.
Okay, thanks very much. I hope you can hear me, because I'm actually traveling between one event and another, so I'm sitting in my car, so I hope you can hear. And I have to go at 12:25. I know that's a real precise time, but just to get to the next thing. I'm lucky in the sense that I obviously worked for a union myself before coming into the Dáil, so I would have an understanding of the role and the work you do. But I think these meetings are brilliant, and I think it's good to have the engagement for everybody involved, as you were saying, for both ourselves and then for yourselves as well. I just wanted to ask around the early years and childcare sector. As far as I'm aware, you still represent workers in that sector, and I wanted to know, A, firstly, is that the case? And B, are you involved with the JLC? What's your opinions or feeling on that? And just, I suppose, in general around the early years in that JLC. That's the only question I have. Thanks very much.
Okay, I might ask Chris to take that if possible.
Yeah, so I think your question is about, do we represent the people who provide the childcare as opposed to the people who inspect the services?
Yeah.
I know initially we were organising in that area, but my understanding is, and this is something that would happen outside of my remit, is that there is another union organising in that area as well. I don't know what the latest situation is on that, and I know that both unions have been talking to each other about that. That's as much as I can say on the workers who provide the childcare piece, but certainly we do represent those inspectors who inspect those facilities to ensure that they're safe for us to put our most precious thing into, which is our children.
Okay, so just really briefly, are you not involved with that JLC negotiations? No, maybe not.
Not in our division of the union.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the clarification there. Sorry for jumping in, but we've a bit like we're a bit like the health sector. We try and follow the government sectors as they change and the government division. So our current mapping is we have an education division, so they would deal with that. So we can certainly, though, Kevin's there noting, I'm sure we can certainly get you an answer to that question from our colleagues in education, and we pass that on. We'll get that information to you.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks for that.
That's great. Thanks very much, Ivana.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I hope everyone can hear me, and apologies I came in a bit late. My hair's still wet because I was at an outdoor meeting, and you can see how wet it is out there. But thank you very much. Just as Kathleen said, I think it's really useful for us as public reps and spokespersons in this area to get such a comprehensive briefing over a range of perspectives from you and in Forsa. It really does give us a better insight, I think, into the work that you're all doing. So that's really useful. I have two specific questions. And obviously I've been children and disabilities person now for over about a year, and but I also should say that in a previous life I practiced as a barrister in what used to be called the HSE courts, and so I represented children in care and guardians ad litem. So I have a particular interest in that. In that cohort or section of children who are really who often fall between the gaps. My first question is about it really prompted by that background, but also by the publication last week of the National Review Panel report into the Declan case, which got actually very little publicity. Kitty Holland did a piece as an editorial in the Irish Times, but it actually is, it raises some huge issues around the need for joined up thinking in services for children who have been so badly let down. I mean, some of the children I would have worked with who had come through who had, might have been in numerous foster placements, for example, and but who had never had a disability diagnosed, for instance. And often you find, as in the Declan case, that multiple supports weren't provided until the end of the line when the child is actually in detention, when the justice system is involved. So my first question is whether whether you can offer insights into greater coordination between services, if that's something that your members are coming to you about, because it's something that's so frustrating, I think, for anyone working in it, and whether we can do more on the recommendation. I mean, the National Review Panel has made some really clear recommendations, but a lot of them relate to services beyond TUSLA. They're looking at education and justice as well. And my second related question is about, I mean, Chris, this reorganisation, Chris, that you described, and the reorganisation of the Children and Disability Service. So again, we're hoping that, I think any of us public reps are hoping that the new reorganisation, the move of a lot of the disability services and actually youth justice into the Department of Children, Roderick O'Gorman's department, that'll make for more coordination. So for example, if you've got a child in school who needs support from HSE, from health services, as well as SNA and education services, that you can do that in a more streamlined way. You don't have to be running between different agencies. So again, whether you as a union have a view on that, whether your members are coming to you about that, is it causing problems? I gather there's been obviously huge bureaucratic issues about moving this massive disability service, massive budget into the children department, which traditionally has been a very small, relatively new civil service department. So I'd love an inside view, if you can, or whether the union has or can take a position on this. Thanks very much.
So yeah, thanks, Ivana. Yeah, on the prevention piece, obviously, the Prevention Partnership and Family Support Service has been developed nationally in TUSLA, and I think it is important to try and keep children and families from going over the edge and being in the system, as I said, and that's where the key role of the development of the prevention piece has come. It does need a lot more funding, and children deserve to be supported at every stage in their life, and not to wait till they become a crisis or a problem or ending up in front of the courts, etc., etc. So yes, it is something that our members would be keen obviously, unfortunately, children will end up in the system. That's just the way it is. But it's to minimise the amount of children that would end up in the system. Our members would be keen keen that that's the thing, rather than the damage being done to children, that they can and families, and they can develop into a normal life and not be just a number in a system that gets passed from, around a system because they're a problem. The young people who end up in special care, as we call it, the nature of the problems that those children have and the difficulties that they present with become worse over recent years, and our social care workers have found that it's becoming a lot more violent a place for them to work in. And there are, just on that point, the people that we represent in social care in those residential special care settings, the injury schemes that are available to the likes of nurses and so on are not equivalent for those social care workers. So that'd be an important thing. Recruitment and retention of workers into that sector is very hard as well. TUSLA have run numerous campaigns to try and get social care workers into special care to deal with those young people who have really complex problems, and people are not stepping up into those roles because it is so difficult. So there's a lot needs to be done there for the unfortunate children who find themselves in that system, but the prevention and the partnership piece with family support practitioners going into families, that needs a lot more development, but it's going in the right direction. On the disability services and the joined up thinking on that one, certainly we're all for that, because we don't want, as Catherine said earlier, people children being on 7 different queues for 7 different things. It should be a one-stop shop where the child is at the centre of it, and whether that's to do with their educational needs, whether it's to do with therapies for speech or behaviour or anything else, that should be in the centre, and that's what the Children's Disability Network piece is trying to achieve.
Just want to come in on that, on one of the things you touched on there, Ivana, and it's to do with the kind of the transfer of budget and all of that type of stuff. And just to say this to you, like, we're not practitioners, but we do represent them. And I just had a light bulb moment. Maybe at some point in the future, this kind of informal dialogue with a kind of a very, very small focus group of our practitioners through us and yourselves would be really, really useful, because, they are at the heart of it. And I just think that would be a really good idea. But on the transfer of budget, just to give you a small bit of landscape. So whatever one thinks about the HSE, you have to remember, they're at it a long time and they're dab hands. They're dab hands at negotiating with us. They're dab hands at managing budgets. And, they've been doing that for a long time. So the Department of Children, excuse the pun, but it's in its relative infancy and hasn't really had a role in negotiating with unions. Now, the Department of Health doesn't negotiate with unions per se, but we always know where they are. We always know where they are through the HSE. So the Department of Children doesn't really have that kind of middle dab hand, if you like, to negotiate with us. Of course, a lot of the staff that do provide their children's services are in TUSLA. They came from the HSE, and they still see themselves as married to those terms and conditions. And maybe at some point in time that will shift. But I just think that it's worth thinking about, that there be more engagement from the department and ourselves in terms of how we manage that through, rather than the department being a kind of an invisible silent partner. It's something that strikes me greatly, particularly if you're talking about transitioning budgets and responsibilities in the area of children's disability. So 2 things to take from that. One is, I think an engagement between yourselves on an informal basis and practitioners would be a good thing. And through us, we can facilitate that in a very, very channeled and focused way. And secondly, that that we might consider how we make the department more visible to us in terms of negotiating, not negotiating is the wrong word, but overseeing and getting through the massive scale of change that's going to take place for the better,
And
thank you for this. Oh, sorry, Catherine.
Sorry, Vanny. I just want to throw in one thing. we also represent, I feel like a salesperson here, we also represent though the workers in the detention schools. And I think that's another key element to the discussion that we even forget when we're tabling it, because that's why we had to do the diagram. We're saying it's for everyone else, it's also for ourselves. We represent the social care workers in the detention schools, and they would tell us, you know, again, for them to provide the level of care that we want. I mean, one of the worst case scenarios for any child, you know, if you go back to the start, every child is born and everyone, you know, starts off with a clean slate. There are terrible things that happen along the way that result in the child ending up in a children's detention school. And our members there will be telling us that, you know, to engage with those young people, to try and give them some, I mean, the earlier the intervention, the better. When the intervention is happening at detention schools, it's really far too late, but it's never too late at the same time. So I think that they'd be anxious for us to get that across, that again, it's not that just the union is saying we need more funding, we want more workers. It's not for funding's sake. It's about providing the level of intervention and care. And the detention schools are kind of, the dirty secret is the wrong language, but they're certainly, they're the bit that none of us, you know, people don't really feel comfortable talking about, because to end up there, it's been a very hard road, and crimes have been committed, you know, so it's often the bit that people don't talk about as such. But definitely, if we were having that kind of focused engagement, I think maybe one of our people from the detention schools to give you an insight there would be very useful.
Look, that would be super. I mean, I won't take up more time, but just to say thank you, Eamon, and thanks to you and Chris, you, Catherine, and to Chris. I think it would be really useful for all of us to have that direct engagement. It would be great. I mean, I've seen, you know, some amazing work practice from the social care workers in the detention schools. And of course, the closure of St. Pat's was a huge progressive step. So, I mean, we have moved on. But look, thank you so much. And I do take, Eamon, your point about, which has struck, I think, many of us, which is that TUSLA do get the blame. And then the staff who work at TUSLA, that clearly affects morale and so on. And yet you look at some of the reports that have come out from the review board and other places, and you see these are failures not of TUSLA, but actually failures across the state, you know, so many agencies. Yeah. So thank you very much for that.
And we'll certainly facilitate that engagement, Ivana. We'll do it. Our people would be they would be delighted to think that they could have that kind of, and look at this kind of discourse, as we say, it's informal and it's information sharing, and it equips us all to be able to try and do the right thing, I think, you know. Okay.
There's no hands indicating at the moment. Does anyone else want to come in at this stage? Jennifer, I see you were there first. Mary then as well, and then we can go to Erin afterwards.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be very quick. I can't figure out where the hand up button is on the I can't see it. Look, my question was in relation to the childcare providers as well. So if there's any further update on that, I'd appreciate if you could send it on. I do just want to say I did have a briefing with the Minister this morning on TUSLA and the impact of the cyber attack on the staff. And I do just want to acknowledge the amazing work that has happened actually over the last week to make sure that that system is kept up and moving as much as is possible in the situation that we're faced. So I would appreciate if you'd pass that on to the staff. I think they've really, really gone above and beyond to make sure that children are protected and that their information is being protected, and things like payments and everything happens. And look, I think coming on the back of COVID, you know, they must be exhausted as well. You know, they're probably looking forward to a little bit of normality, and now they're into this upheaval again. So that was just the point I want to make. If you could just pass on our thanks and our recognition and acknowledgement of the work that they've put in. And this conversation is really, really useful. And I agree with Ivana. I think it would be very good to have further follow-up discussions as well. So thank you for facilitating it.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, just to say, Jennifer, on passing on the thanks, we will do that, but our members will have an opportunity, because this is being recorded, to see this exchange as well. So they will hear it personally from you as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, Mary, did you want to come in there? Thanks very much for that, Jennifer.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this and for the invitation to this and the opportunity to participate in it. Eamon, you and I know each other where I have been a witness in a support witness for people that you have been representing. So I suppose I would hope from that and from other things I'm about to say, you would appreciate that any stereotype perception that might come from me because of my party or some, it will be absolutely blown out of the water. And I was disappointed with my party knowing that I have been retained counsel for the GMB trade union, that I set up a college in trade union studies, got a QQI accredited, did all of that, come very much from the position of appreciating collective bargaining and advancing that, and I've had conversations with the Taoiseach in that regard. So I suppose you have a friend in court if that's anything to go by. A few things over the number of years. Prior to becoming a senator, I'm a practicing barrister in employment law. So I've represented people on both sides of the table, both employers and employees. So I've been very much aware of the disparity between HSE funded in the public-private element of things. One of the things that I came across also, but even between TUSLA and HSE funded, is the idea of night work, how that is measured, how it's paid for, and you can have two employees working in the same residential care service for children, for instance, and them remunerated differently. So I've been in making representations on that over the years. So it's just one thing, I suppose, I wouldn't mind an update on it. I'm a little bit out of touch because I'm about 18 months out of touch of that. I've been very mindful of TUSLA, throughout the mother and baby home discussions. In others, I was recently in a briefing with the Law Library where they were talking about GDPR and the implementation of GDPR, and the Data Commission came on and talked that there was the same 10 cohort are always the top breachers in the country, and TUSLA are within that top 10, and thinking there are staff underneath that. So it's really important that we are resourcing in the terms of legislation, equipping, and looking at that. So having an opportunity to speak to people on the front line and living the experience, that I think would be really, really valuable, because I do feel for when, and I know that when it comes to discussing the preschool regulations, the application of preschool regulations, I am going to be very critical of the arbitrary nature of that, but I appreciate that is about the documentation that's supplied to the inspectorate when they go into a childcare facility, and it is not a disparagement of the actual inspectors. So I think that maybe that's something that we almost need to have as a warning at the beginning of every discussion in childcare committees and otherwise, to say, we're not talking about the individuals that are administering this, we're talking about what they have been asked to do, and whether the appropriateness of that, and whether it's extensive enough, and all of those. So I'm banking a little bit of credit for the future, because I know that that's going to be a big thing for me in how childcare services can manage themselves. I think that the section 38 and 39, I have experienced that very much with Walk in Drimna, that they, and I've spoken about this in the Disability Matters Committee, that they have a difficulty retaining staff. And consequently, you have that turnover because they're competing with the different funding for people doing exactly the same job. And so there is a fundamental discrimination there that needs to be addressed. So I have made representations on that regard, in regard to that. What else I would do? And another thing I suppose I would say for Forsa, I mean, I've come across Forsa where I've represented childcare providers from the management, the employer side of things. And I have to say it's been a very impressive, very professional, where we've been in, maybe I would get called in a lot as an investigator. And it's a very impressive representation. And I've had, because I think that childcare, the early years professionals work in very difficult circumstances, regardless of public or private. But another area where I have come alongside employees will be in the SNAs. So for SNAs in schools, one thing I think I'd maybe like to bring up with you is the administration of that circular 72 of 2011, which is the grievance and disputes for SNAs within schools. I think a difficulty, union representation, where you have a lot of employees in the one sector, you naturally always have the threat of industrial action. But in schools where an SNA might be only 2 SNAs in a whole school situation, where there is bullying of that SNA, it is very difficult for them to, and I have come across a number of situations where there has either been a change of personnel from Force's point of view, a lot, and there hasn't been a consistency throughout. So I would be as a friend, in the same way as Eamon would have been familiar with me in an instance he was involved, where you're coming alongside as a friend to support people, but find that there is an inconsistency. So but I think that SNAs can be picked off and their lives made hell. And I have a number of instances. I've brought it all the way through to the WRC in support of people. And then the solicitors for schools will pull out a thing of, these are public service, so it doesn't cover them, when in actual fact it does. And I had letters from the minister proving that. But that's maybe a problematic area. Other than that, I mean, really, it's just for me to say, I really support what you're doing. I support your calls. I think, as I say, I'm here and only too delighted to engage at any level, at any time. Would be thrilled to do that.
Well, okay. Well, thanks for that, Mary. I hope everybody is okay from that previous case.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But the SNAs are, as you know, represented by FORSA. FORSA is split up into divisions itself, and they fall under our education wing. But certainly, that's a conversation we could have in relation to the disparity of pay between two people working night. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the reference is there. Does that relate to sleepover payments or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and what is under the Organisation of Working Time Act?
Yeah,
how that is determined.
Yeah.
Because there was a time when it was only 4 hours instead of the whole night, when people are on call, at all times. Sorry, Chris.
I can probably help with that for everybody else on the call who mightn't be as familiar with it as you are, Mary. So, the Organisation of Working Time Act, people were working and they were doing what was known as sleepovers, where they slept on the premises, and if a situation arose, they might be called on to deal with it and so on. That went through a labour court thing and all the rest back in 2011, 2012. And the Labour Court determined that the rate of pay for the sleepovers wouldn't be just an allowance, that you would get an hourly rate of pay for those hours, which is based on the national minimum wage at the moment. But you get paid, obviously, if you wake up and you have to deal with something, your normal hourly rate of pay. So that's where it currently stands at the minute.
Yeah, but there was a difference in how TUSLA administered that and how the HSE, the case in the Labour Court was a HSE only, and it was all of the unions were involved in taking that case, and it was very justified. If you have to sleep somewhere, you can't go and have a drink, you can't, meet a friend, you can't do anything. If you're working,
you're on duty,
you're sleeping. So it was a perfectly reasonable outcome. But the difficulty for some of the providers was that because TUSLA weren't administering it in the same way that HSE were, you could have two differently funded posts doing the same job under the same roof, and that was very unfair.
Okay.
So just it's a something to follow.
The other problem that brought, Mary, was because the Labour Court determined that sleeping hours on a sleepover was now working time. People could only work a maximum of 48 hours a week, so it left gaps all over the system in terms of. Now they need more people and more resources, and that created a huge problem. And it created a scenario where state agencies were openly, breaking the law. And we've nearly ironed all that out.
Well done.
We've nearly ironed all that out with change rostering and so on. But it's not completely eradicated. There are still breaches of the legislation, but we're nearly there.
TUSLA is fully compliant on that because I negotiated it with them for the new rosters. So they're fully compliant for the last couple of years on the Organisation of Working Time Act. But it's interesting, Mary, and I'll take that on board. There's agencies providing maybe residential services on behalf of TUSLA is what I'm hearing from you, and they may not be paying the same rates as TUSLA direct employees. So I'll have a look into
it's just one for them.
Thanks for that.
I'm just anxious to give Erin, if you wanted to come in, just as the last, but certainly not the least speaker.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and my apologies if there's a noise in the background. We have working here today for some reason, unexpectedly. But I found this engagement so worthwhile and so informative. I'm coming from a level way down there, and my knowledge of FORSA as a trade union, and how all the parts, the cogs in the wheel, how they all work together, and the the concept of actually having those targeted meetings that would be focused on a particular aspect would be really, really beneficial for me. Because I have an awful lot of friends who are under the Forsa and colleagues and people who I know so well who are under the Forsa umbrella. And it's such a wide and diverse umbrella. So to be able to focus and pinpoint and raise my knowledge on the area. So absolutely, I don't really particularly have a question because an awful lot of my questions were answered. But I suppose the targeted and focused meetings would be really, really beneficial, and I would really look forward to having that. So thank you very much.
We will certainly, that the big asterisk on that particular point there, and we will certainly advance that, because I think, as I said, I think the people that we represent will actually welcome that, you know. I think we would be capable of tugging out a really sharply focused handful of people that could have a real engagement with you on that basis, you know.
And Eamon, if I could just come in on one point, that what we were referencing all the groups that we represent, and one that we didn't mention, and Mary, you just triggered it in my mind, was we represent the counsellor therapists, and they're going to be heavily involved in providing the follow-up services after to the mother and baby homes report. And just to put all our cards on the table, like Forsa as a union will be very active in that area. Over the coming months, we're going to be looking, the counsellor therapist grade was introduced back in 2000 as a response to provide trauma counselling for victims of clerical abuse. And during the moratorium, I think we've 90 counsellor therapists in the country in or around that during the moratorium. And for obvious reasons, there was a number of counsellor therapists brought in to do counselling services and to provide them, but they had to be brought in through agencies. So they work at the direction of the HSE, and will possibly now TUSLA as part of the mother and baby homes, but they're self-employed and then they operate through an agency. So just in the interest of transparency, when you see us raising this issue, I just want to flag it with yourselves, we will be raising that issue that, you know, those people should be brought into full employment by the HSE, and that there should be more resources put into that area, because I think, again, as a citizen and as a union member, as a union official, that's one of the key services we provide, and a very important one is that counselling and trauma therapy and trauma counselling. And I know I have the language wrong, and my members will kill me that I'm calling it the wrong thing, but you know, these are extremely skilled, qualified healthcare professionals providing, again, an unseen service, because it's not the one that people are not going to talk about accessing that service, but it's very important that it's funded properly. So just said I'd mention it here. Thanks.
And that reminds me, Catherine, and thank you for that. And that reminds me also, one of the difficulties that maybe I've come across is with speech and language or other therapists, that for maternity relief, is there a restriction on if a private practice person wants to come in and provide that maternity leave on a short-term contract? For a start, the contracts are too short, or are they too long? I forget which. So it's too long in that it would inhibit them from maintaining a private practice. There's a bar on private practice, which means they won't come in and just cover the maternity, which adds to the backlog. And it is one of the issues in the backlog. So I would be interested in exploring that with you in a chat of, you know, what we could, maybe solutions I could put forward or ideas to put forward. I'd love that kind of a chat.
Yeah, I think that's, and again, we could, and you can probably tell from us that the five of us on the union side could talk all day and could talk for it, probably no more than yourselves.
I'd love it.
The different points, but I think the key thing when you look at our health and social care professionals, like our counsellor therapists, our SLTs, or OTs, or physios, all of those grades, they're predominantly female, and the nettle has never been grasped that if you have a young female workforce, you need to factor in maternity leave to your stats. There is no point saying we need 100 SLTs. You need 100 SLTs, and you need to factor in 10%, for example, for maternity leave, or else you're going to keep having this problem. And I think it is that it's too long. I think it is too long. It's not worth, because between the paid maternity and the unpaid, and naturally for most people, you're going to take as long as you can at the start. But that's what I did, went on unpaid leave for as long as I could, a long time ago. But I think that's that most people's instinct is to take a good break, or to take that, well, I say break, not a break, but a break from work to stay at home. So I think from the union's point of view, we've always been advocating that there needs to be a good look at the figures that are providing the service and factor in from day one what maternity cover looks like, so that you have that cover there. But I mean, that's obviously
as there is in nursing, by the way.
yeah, exactly.
As there is in nursing, they have a fixed percentage to which automatically covers maternity. You know?
So that's something. So yeah, that's our view.
That's brilliant.
Okay.
That's brilliant.
Can you all
Thought.
go off and get that for us? Yeah.
We can certainly be voices. I mean, it's very practical.
Yeah.
That's a very practical, obvious point.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
It's also better value, just from, sorry, Chris, just from a cost effective point of view. It's like pretending that you don't, if you're doing your budget at the start of the year, it's like putting on blinkers and pretending that you're not going to have this gap in the service, and not then going to have to try and either advertise, bring in someone privately who's not going to want to come in, it's too short, pay an agency to recruit them and pay a top up. Like, even if you're just from an actual pragmatic housekeeping point of view, it'll cost you less in the long term to factor it in. So
yeah, and I have constituents who have daughters qualified as social workers who are working on agencies when it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Did I say that in a recording?
Okay.
But it would be very much my view. Employ them. Let's employ them, you know.
Well, we did just to say too, so we did a conversion exercise last year to reduce the agency numbers, because that's something that is an extra expense on TUSLA, and it also to stabilise the workforce, to have people in direct employment. So like there was 450 people converted, and a lot of those were social workers who had been agency workers. So yeah, there's moves to keep that going, and there's a competition going on now for them to become permanent employees as well. So there's that whole process is actually going on as we speak.
I was sending out an email later today reminding them, saying you've applied for this.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Brilliant.
well, look,
thank you.
Look, in the round then, I hope the session has informed you of who we are and where we are, and who and what we represent. And it seems to me that because of the newness, if you like, of the Department of Children, and as I said, they're not the dab hands that the HSE were, and that's not a slight on anybody. We probably need to develop that a bit further, and we certainly, if you are interested in some breaking down some barriers between the politically elected and representative system and people who represent workers, we could certainly facilitate a focused engagement with our practitioners at the sharp end of the delivery of service. I think that would be really good. So when we prompt you on that in a couple of months' time, you'll know who we are and what we do. And I think if we got that much out this morning, it would have been very worthwhile. The last thing I want to do is thank yourselves for taking the time out to be with us this morning or this afternoon. I want to thank you. It means a lot to us to have this type of engagement, and also to thank Kevin for using all his tactical now skill and abilities to pull this together. So thanks to all, and we'll probably leave it at that for now. And it's been a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See you, folks. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye now. Bye-bye.